Hello, I am Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. I've been getting requests to cover research methods of AQA syllabus, so today we'll do that. I have just randomly picked up one past paper from Unit 2, Oxford International AQA PS02 paper, but this lesson will be equally useful to UK AQA A-level students because the questions are overlapping in both syllabi. So in this class, I think this is the January 2021 paper which had come. We'll be looking at section C, research methods. As much as I can cover, I will. I will explain to you, as always, how to write answers and also demonstrate some sample answers to you for better understanding. If you want to watch more videos covering research methods, I've already done that previously in my channel. I will link the playlist in the description box below. So today, without much ado, let's begin. The first question asked in this year was, a psychology teacher noticed that students who attended a gym performed better in their A-level examinations than students who did not attend the gym. To investigate this, she interviewed 30 A-level students from her school. Each student was asked the same 10 questions in the same order. Write a suitable aim for the psychology teacher's investigation. Do not confuse an aim with a hypothesis. That is the first suggestion I can give because that's the most common mistake that students make. So make sure when you're writing an aim, it is in the format of what is being investigated rather than a prediction about what the outcome will be. So always try to phrase or begin the aim with to investigate. This is a comparison study, what we call an experiment, though it might not seem on the surface because it looks like an interview study. But interview is the method of data collection. If you see, the chief objective of the research is to compare those who attend a gym and those who do not. So it's like a natural experiment that is taking place. When we write an aim for an experiment, we know we have to suggest what is being investigated in terms of the impact of which independent variable on which dependent variable. So to investigate the impact of dash independent variable on dash dependent variable. That is the template you can think of when you're writing your answer. So I'll just show you what I mean by this by actually writing the aim for this study. We can directly begin the sentence with to investigate. So to investigate whether attending the gym results in better performance in A-level examinations than not attending the gym. So in how I have written the answer, what I want you to observe is, I've begun with to investigate. The beginning is appropriate to an aim rather than a hypothesis. Also, I have specified the IV, which is attending the gym. And I have also specified the DV, which is performance in A-level examinations. Because it's an experiment, like I always say, even when I'm discussing how to write the hypothesis, you must draw comparison in the aim or hypothesis. Like you don't just write that whether going to the gym results in better performance in A-level exam and you don't just stop at that. You need to go further and you need to mention then not attending the gym. So comparison is with not attending the gym. That should be made very clear in your aim. So make sure you specify both the levels of the IV or both the conditions between which a comparison is being drawn. Today I intend to be limited in how much I'm elaborating upon how to write the answers. Normally I discuss more, but I believe since I've made so many videos already and hopefully you've been seeing those videos, are the usual suggestions which I always give, like how you should read the questions carefully and all, the general advice I give, You must have already come across that. If you haven't, you can watch some of my previous videos. In this video, I'm just going to discuss how to write the specific answers which are required over here. So let's move ahead. Next, they've asked us briefly describe what a hypothesis is. This is coming within a scenario question like application type, but this is not an application question. This is a purely AO1 descriptive question, because they're asking you what a hypothesis is. They're not asking you what the hypothesis is in the psychology teacher's study, which is given above. They haven't phrased it that way. So they want you to say in general what a hypothesis is. Now, hypothesis, you have to give a definition, but it should be worth 2 marks. So if you just say it's a predictive statement, that's like just giving one feature of a hypothesis, it will not be worth 2 marks. For 2 marks, even if you're writing only one sentence, but at least 2 features of a hypothesis should be included in that to justify the 2 marks. So we know key features of a hypothesis are: one, it is a predictive statement of the outcome. So that will definitely be there. Also, it is testable, verifiable, falsifiable, something like that. You need to include that feature as well when you're writing. If you want to include, say, 3 or 4 features in one sentence, that's also good. But when they mark you, how they'll mark you, supposing for saying testable, they give you 1 mark. For saying that it helps to predict the outcome, they give you another mark. You could also give an example, like after saying that it's a predictive statement, you can say that hypothesis can be directional, that's specific, and non-directional, that's non-specific. You get credit for that also. Essentially giving 2 unique points about what a hypothesis is, which can include an example also or types also, will get you 2 marks. So make sure you don't write anything less than that. How I would answer this question is, a hypothesis is a verifiable statement about the predicted outcome of a study that is proposed before the study begins. So I just want to drive the point. So I want you to know, for saying that it's a verifiable statement, I'll get 1 mark. And for saying it's the predicted outcome, I'll get a 2nd mark. A frequently made mistake here is to talk about the aim rather than the hypothesis. There's just too much confusion in students' minds between aims and hypothesis. So some would suggest that it's the purpose of the study or the objective. That's not true. The purpose or objective of conducting the study is its aim. It's not the hypothesis. So make sure you don't make that mistake. Next question is, before selecting a sample, psychologists identify a population. Briefly outline what is meant by a population. Again, this is completely an AO1 question. They haven't referenced the scenario above. And to make it even more explicit to you that they haven't referenced the scenario, you can say they've given a general statement before. Like in general, what psychologists do is take a sample from a population. So it's very clear to you, it's AO1. Please do not reference the scenario. Rather, what you have learned in your textbook directly about what a population is, just give its definition, because it's for 1 mark. There are always many ways of writing the same answer. So population could be defined as ideally all those people to whom we want to generalize the results of a study. But instead of that, you might have learned other things in your textbook, like it's the total collection of people whom a researcher is interested in studying, or it is all the people whose behavior the researcher wants to understand. Those also perfectly acceptable. As I always say, if you're using good terminology and what you're saying is correct, your answer does not have to be in a fixed way. As long as it's correct, your wording can be different. So always the answers which I give are just samples. This is the ideal answer which you should be writing. The population is, or population refers to those individuals to whom a researcher would like to generalize the findings of their study. You could also say apply the findings of the study. As long as terminology is good, makes sense, it's clear, you will get marks. So this is what we've done on page 1 for research methods. Let's come to the next page. The psychology teacher used a random sample. Briefly describe what a random sample is. Okay, again, it's a general question, AO1. They've asked you what a random sample is. It's worth 1 mark. They haven't asked you explain how the teacher drew a random sample or why she took a random sample. Just generally they're asking you. It's worth 1 mark again, like the previous question. So you can just give a definition. Again, students mostly confuse between random and volunteer sample. They're totally different, but I don't know, in students' minds, there is a lot of misconception. So they believe random sample is the people who come on their own for the study. So because the researcher does not have a hold over who opts in for the study, so becomes random. That's not what a random sample is. The second mistake students make is to suggest that they confuse it with random assignment or random allocation. So what they'll say is everyone in the sample has an equal opportunity of being selected. If everyone in the sample has equal opportunity, how come the researcher has a sample even before sampling? So when you suggest something, just check once to make sure that does it make sense what you're saying. Okay, this is, they're asking you sample. They're asking about how people are selected in the first place, of course, from the population. If the sample is already there, why is the researcher selecting from them? So don't make these type of errors. Equal opportunities, the equal chance of being selected is there, but in whom? From where? From the population, not from the sample. What mistakes students are making, what is underlying these type of bad answers which students are giving? They are just rote learning. Random, okay, whenever they ask me random, I have to say equal opportunity. So they just learn 2 words, equal opportunity of being selected. Then when they go to phrase the answer and they have to put a complete sentence, they don't know how to put it because they've just learned 2 words about what it is. So then they just try to fill in any words. So equal opportunity of selecting from the sample. That is why you need to understand what you are learning. This shows lack of understanding. You know words equal opportunity have to come, but you don't know the sense of it. You don't know from where those people are coming to whom equal opportunity is being given to include, because you haven't really understood what a random sample is. So make sure before you attempt your research methods paper, you understand what the concepts are. Then it won't be an issue to phrase things into a sentence. So what a random sample is a sample which has been selected or has been drawn from a population by giving every member of the population equal opportunity of being selected in the sample. I will try to cover one video in which I explain these concepts to you, sampling, different types of sample and all. As of now, make sure you don't do this 2-word learning which I have suggested. Always read thoroughly. It's worth the time that goes into it, because otherwise you're not going to get marks anyway. What marks are you going to get by memorizing those 2 words and applying them in the wrong context in the paper? So it's worth reading completely what's given in the textbook. It's interesting also if you try to make sense of it, and then you'll be able to write good answers in the paper. Now, related to that, really, there was describe how a random sample can be collected in psychological research. I'm pretty sure I must have covered this question in some past video also, because this just comes up way too frequently in the paper. Despite it coming very frequently and despite it being very easy to answer, maximum mistakes are made on this question. Why? Because, like I said, random sample versus volunteer sample is not clear to students. So they'll start suggesting that some sort of advertisement should be there and all. If those are the steps you're going to outline, then you're not going to get marks because it is a random sample, not volunteer. Secondly, if instead of how, you're going to talk about why, which is many students do, everyone has an equal opportunity of being selected, so there's no bias. So the sample is more generalizable, it's more representative. They haven't asked you why anyone is selecting a random sample. Very clearly, they've asked you how. How meaning the steps or the procedure. So essentially, like very basically, some sort of lottery method is used to take in people from the population. You just have to outline it in 4 steps because 4 marks question. So very simply think of step 1, step 2, step 3 and step 4. That will give you a neatly organized answer also, and you will get your 4 marks for it. So random sampling begins at having a population list. So how I would put this answer is, again there are many ways. This is one sample answer. The researcher obtains a list of all members in the population Now, what is the meaning of random? Unpredictable. So now we have to say how they select people in an unpredictable way. Then, now there are 2 ways mainly. One is to use a random numbers generator on a software. The second is the usual Chitbol method. I will for now elaborate on the Chitbol method. It's your choice. It's just the traditional way of doing it. It's easier to do, and so I'm putting down that. You can talk about computer selection also. So then they write the names of each member on a separate sheet of paper, fold it, put the sheets in a bowl and shuffle them. This might seem very unnecessarily detailed to you, but this is exactly what they're asking you. They're asking you the how of it. So you really have to write these things. So they put it in the bowl and shuffle it. Then they draw a few chits according to the total number of participants being targeted for the sample. And those whose names are selected are included in the final sample. Again, I'd like to point out 2 frequently made mistakes. One is not to suggest that how many participants are needed, those many names are drawn, like not making drawing related to sample size explicitly. You need to do that. So make sure you specify that as many chits will be drawn, as many people are needed in the sample. Things might seem very obvious, but they want to check you no, because believe it or not, it might be very obvious to you. Some students really don't know the procedure of random sampling. So they're not going to assume that it's obvious, so we should not ask this question. When they've asked you write explicitly, write the baby steps which are there in the answer. Secondly, another mistake is to exceed what is asked in the question. So some students have learned very properly that when it comes to random sampling, not everyone will agree. So even if the researcher selects, say, 10 people from the population, they might not be agreeable to participate, and so ethically they cannot be coerced into participation. All that is absolutely correct. But what are they asking you in the question? How is the sample collected? What happens after the sample is collected? Do people agree to participate or not? That is not something that has been asked to you. So if you're going to discuss that procedure, like after the researcher has fixed on a few names, then what happens? That is not what the question requires you to do. Secondly, it also goes into the territory of giving weaknesses. This sounds like when you start pointing out ethical issues that you want to show the drawbacks of random sampling, why it is unethical or why it's impractical for a researcher to use it. Again, that's not in the scope of the question. So keep your answers very targeted towards what is being asked. Don't go beyond what is being asked. Also, I'll just show the marking to you once, how this answer will be marked, like how you attain 4 marks. For mentioning that there is a list of population members, you get 1 mark, because that is definitely one thing the researcher has to do, get a list. Second, for mentioning the chits, putting the chits in the bowl, you can get 2 marks, 3 marks. Drawing a few chits according to number of participants required, that can get a 4th mark. The last point, who will be included, it's more like a finishing sentence, like a conclusion. They will not give credit for it, but even if they do, that's like an extra point which is there. So I've pointed out which are the 4 unique points which I have made, for which I will get marks. In every question, the general rule applies that all points should be unique. They should not overlap or be repetitions of each other. I am zooming out from time to time and showing you the answers, because in case you need to record them, you will have to take screenshots. This paper I am not going to upload on my website. So this will not be available to you as a PDF. Okay, let's look at the next question. Now they want us to write something related to the scenario. So I just want you to notice the wording. Name the type of interview the psychology teacher used used and briefly explain your answer. Now explicitly they are telling you they don't want some general interview or some type of interview which the psychology teacher used. Means whenever they want you to contextualize your answer to the scenario, they're going to point it out in the question. So this is an AO2 question, not an AO1 question. Let us look at the scenario once again to be sure about which interview she has used. In the scenario, they have specified that she asked the same 10 questions in the same order to all the students. If you see, the scenario is very brief and we just have this one line about how interviewing was done. From this we can deduce, because we know only 3 types of interviews are there: structured, semi-structured and unstructured. We know that type of interview which is very standardized is a structured interview. So same questions in same order. So that is what we need to write. It is worth 3 marks. So definitely first we can suggest the name of the interview. For these type of questions, just giving the name earns 1 mark, giving the correct name. And then 2 marks will be about justifying what the interview is and at the same time explicitly linking to the scenario. If I just say it is a structured interview and I say that that is because all the questions are fixed, on a structured interview, I will not get marks, because then I'm making it an AO1 answer. I have to make it AO2. I have to say specifically what this psychology teacher has done, which is making it a structured interview. Then only I'll get full credit. So I'll just show how we can write this answer. We can say she has used a structured interview. So here we get 1 mark for identification. Then we can say, as in a structured interview, questions are standardized. The psychology teacher has used the same 10 questions for all participants. Further, as the questions are always in a fixed order, the teacher has kept the order of questions the same for all students. Okay, so 1 mark for saying it's a structured interview, second for saying that same 10 questions are asked for all the participants, and third for saying that the order of questions is same. So I want you to focus on how I get marks only if I link whatever point I'm making to the situation. If I don't link and I just simply say structured interviews have fixed order of questions, or they have the same questions, I don't get marks. Also, it is worth 3 marks, so I have 3 unique points which I have stated. I cannot just give 1 point that it is same and all same. Students forget about the fixed order part of it, so they are not able to identify another feature. The very fact that explicitly in the scenario they mentioned that the order of the questions is also fixed is because they want to draw your attention to the fact that uh, it is a structured interview. Like they want to show you all the features of a structured interview were there in this study. Now next what they're asking is write a question that the teacher could have asked in order to collect quantitative data. First policy is whenever they ask you to write a question, you must put it in direct quotations. You must give the exact question. You must never give indirectly what the teacher could have asked. Secondly, when they ask you that a question should be to collect quantitative data, they obviously mean a closed question with fixed response choices. That's the definition of a closed question. And only when you have fixed response choices can you convert it to numbers. So you must write the question in direct quotations and present the response choices to answer that question. So for these two things, if you do, you will get 2 marks as long as the content is correct. Now, we cannot write general questions. Like I'll give you examples of what mistakes students make. If you look at the scenario, the teacher wants to know about attending the gym. So the question has to be around attending the gym. Believe it or not, students will write questions like, the teacher will ask the student, are you in a good mood today? Yes or no. What does good mood have to do with attending the gym or anything to do with A-level examinations? So do not give general questions which are out of context, which have no relevance to what is being studied over here. That will not fetch you any credit. You need to give a question which is relevant to the topic under investigation and follow the other rules which I have given. So either you can write something about attending the gym or something about performance in A-level examinations. And questions can be very simple. They need not be unnecessary complex or use flowery language. They are not testing your language skills. So I could give a very simple question such as, how often do you attend the gym? Less than twice a week? Less than 4 times a week? Six or 7 days a week? Now I've deliberately written the question like this instead of writing a yes, no or a rating scale question, because I want you to be aware that closed questions can be literally anything as long as you are giving the response choices from which participants have to select. You're giving 3 choices here. Participants will have to select one of them which is applicable to them, and you can convert it to numbers, because I know here I'm exceeding the answer a little and I'm going into a little explanation, but I want you to know this because many students don't understand this. In a closed question, what is happening is why even this counts as a closed question is because you will decide beforehand, supposing that if any student selects less than twice a week, I'll give 1 mark. If they select less than 4 times a week, I'll give 2 marks. And if they select 6 or 7, I'll get 3 marks. So it becomes quantitative. No, you can decide beforehand for which alternative you're going to give how many marks, and you'll assign those marks or those scores once they answer. So from that viewpoint, any question which has fixed choices will become a closed question. So it can be perfectly be like this. Other possibilities are how often do you attend the gym? Rate on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 meaning never to 10 meaning regularly. So that's a rating scale type of question. A simple yes no question could be, do you attend the gym? Yes or no. That is also a perfectly acceptable question. Many students feel because it is starting with how, so it is not a closed question, it's an open question. How often, how many, how much are closed questions, they are not open questions. So be sure about the phrases which you learn with which you can open or closed questions. Don't have any confusion about those things. Now how it will be marked is, like I've told you, a direct question relevant to the topic given, 1 mark, response choices given and explained clearly, 2nd mark. One more mistake which students make is to write indirectly. So supposing instead of this, if I am to write, the teacher could have asked them about their frequency of attending the gym. That's not going to get me marks. They've asked you for a question. You're not saying what is the question. She could have asked about something. You're giving a very general topic about which she could have asked. Exactly what she would be asking, you haven't specified. So never give the question in indirect language. Next question here is, briefly explain in what way the question you have written collects quantitative data. This is what I have just explained to you. We need to just put it down in words. It's just worth 1 mark. It's an AO2 1 mark type of question. You're applying your knowledge to what you've written previously. So I just need to show how scores will be assigned, which will result in quantitative data, what I just explained to you. So since the response choices or you can even say alternatives will receive predetermined scores, or you can say they'll be assigned predetermined scores, they will collect quantitative data. If they would have asked for 2 marks, we could have extended a little more the answer and we could have just said that, like given an example, supposing less than once a week will get 1 mark, less than 4 times will get 2 marks, that way. But it's only worth 1 mark, so writing this much is enough, like just giving the basic logic of how it is collecting quantitative data. Let's come to the next page. It's a very easy to score section, section C, so many questions, simple ones. Just take the right approach and you can easily score, because this is one which is not very content heavy. It's more about applying your knowledge. So always in any board, psychology subject, research methods is the most scoring opportunity for students. Okay, here they've asked the data the teacher collected was primary data. Briefly describe what primary data is. 1 mark again, you just have to give a definition. As examiners have rightly pointed out repeatedly, students believe primary data is which is directly collected by the researcher and secondary data is which is collected by someone else. It's not wrong, but it's not the key defining feature. So for every term that you're learning, do you know actually what separates it from something else? Like in this case, what separates primary data from something else? It's not about researchers' efforts or whether they're in direct contact with participants. That just happens to be. The key separation point is that primary data is specific to the aim of a study. It's collected with that intention to be able to answer this particular research question. Whereas secondary data is meant for some other research question. The purpose of collecting data was something else and now it's being borrowed for this study. That is the key feature which distinguishes primary and secondary data. So somehow that should be explicit in your answer rather than who's collecting it. Who's collecting it is not the chief concern. So here what we can just say is primary data is that data which is collected directly from participants to address the specific research question in a study. Okay, these are all purely descriptive AO1 type of questions. It's just about have you learned your research methods correctly. The next question is relevant to the scenario. The psychology teacher was concerned about demand characteristics. Briefly explain one way the teacher could have reduced the risk of demand characteristics in her interview. One thing is not contextualizing the answer. That's the primary mistake students will make. They will say what demand characteristics are and give some very general proposal on how they can be curtailed. For example, a student will say she could have hidden the purpose of the study from the participants, which is correct. But then they don't elaborate at all what is the purpose she should have hidden or exactly what she should have told them or how she would have hidden it. Nothing. So that's not enough contextualization. I always say you should use wording from the study, which does not mean you just use the word primary teacher, but the rest of your answer is a very general AO1 type of answer. Use wording means use ample wording from the scenario so such that you're able to explain the full answer with relevance to the scenario given. So, no doubt some type of deception can reduce demand characteristics. Other ways of reducing demand characteristics include blinding, eliminating bias, any steps that can be taken towards that. Let's take a quick look at the scenario again to see which of these ways would be best suited to the scenario given. In this case, she wants to interview them. The method of collecting data is interview. So ideally, we should think of something that can reduce demand characteristics when they're answering interview questions. So just always imagine yourself in the place of the participants. If you were in place of participants, that is if you had to answer questions about your attending the gym or not, what sort of demand characteristics would you show? You would maybe show that social desirability, which is one type of demand characteristic. So in the interview, you would suggest you attend the gym a lot, whereas you don't, just because it sounds desirable to give that type of an answer. That's a very strong possibility. So first you can think of, okay, this would be the demand characteristic, then you'll be able to think of the solution. Or for example, if you know that those who are attending the gym are expected to perform better in A-level examinations, then you might over-report or under-report attending the gym according to your performance. So if you have performed well, you might suggest you've been attending the gym a lot, whereas that might not be the truth. Conversely, if you have got a low score on your A-level exam, you would suggest that you haven't been attending the gym a lot, which might not be true. If this is the demand characteristic, think about how it can be rectified. So the first thing when you need to contextualize is you need to think how this thing would play out in this scenario. If I was the participant, what would be my tendency over here? And then you will be able to think of a solution. Once you know what the problem is, then you'll be able to think of, okay, in this situation, then this is how it should be reduced. So let's assume people are showing social desirability and they are showing that they attend the gym a lot. Now, how the teacher could have reduced these demand characteristics? One thing definitely becomes anonymity in interviews, like we have learned. People tend to give false answers when they believe their name will be associated with those answers, like they'll be identifiable. So if they give that answer, somehow it will affect their reputation directly. So she can tell them that they will not be named in their answers, and then that's why they might be more free to suggest that they haven't say been attending the gym much because they feel no one will come to know about it and they won't face embarrassment. But that I would say, no doubt we can write that, but it's something to do more with the questionnaire, because anonymity in interview, no doubt it can be for confidentiality. Name won't come out in the report, but still the interviewer is face to face with the participant. So there the participant again might show desirability because of the presence of the interviewer to impress the interviewer. So we can think of something better. Another way could be to use a different technique altogether. Instead of interviewing participants, the most objective way would be just to go to the gym wherever records are maintained and just check out how often different students are attending the gym, and to find out their A level examination performance, she could just take a look at their report cards again rather than asking them directly. So abandoning interview altogether and using a more objective means is definitely a way of reducing demand characteristics. And what I had mentioned in the beginning, that is also definitely a solution, which is not giving explicit instructions to the participants, like not letting them know the true purpose of the study. Instead of telling them it's about seeing their gym attendance and relating it with their performance, some general purpose could be given to them of the study, such as just investigating students' school habits. So in that only, like, the psychologist can just pretend she's asking them about a lot of different things, like have filler questions also. So just like she's happening to ask about the gym also, school performance, and a myriad of other things, so that students don't come to know, okay, these are the two things she wants to link: gym attendance and exam performance. So no doubt you can write about that. Like I said, that the instruction should not be given to them, but exactly then what is she telling them? It's general on school habits, academic habits, it's a general academic study, something like that. You have to justify whatever you're saying. For now, I'm just suggesting that interview should not be done at all, and rather another method should be used. So what I would say is the teacher could have used a more objective way of gathering data, instead of using interview for her study. For example, she could have collected students' gym records from the school gym and investigated their report cards to see their exam performance. Your key is giving a very specific and exact solution of what the teacher could have done. If you're going to give a general solution that she shouldn't use interview, instead she should have just gathered records, but you're not going to specify what those records are, how they are related to the measured variables, you're not going to get marks. Okay, next is, in order to find out more information, the psychology teacher decided to follow up her research with a questionnaire. She created a questionnaire with open and closed questions. Briefly describe what a closed question is. Again, they've asked you generally. So give 2 unique points about what a closed question is. Do not give superficial points. Again, give key characteristics. So instead of saying questions that begin with rate or score, do you, how much, those are not defining features of closed question. Like, the phrases with which they begin are not the key aspects of what a closed question is. It's just the way of writing. A closed question essentially is one that allows for a very limited response. That feature should come out in some wording or the other in your answer. So one thing is, be sure of the key definition. And the second unique point you can give is definitely you can give a question starting for that phrasing, or you can say that such phrasing is used to design a closed question. That's fine. But don't make it the primary point which you are giving. Okay, so what I would suggest is a closed question is the question which allows a respondent to give a limited response. It provides selected response choices to the question from which the respondent must make a selection. So I have chosen not to give an example this time, though an example is a very desirable way of explaining something or describing something. So definitely instead of this you could say, for example, do you attend the gym, yes or no, is a closed question. Absolutely fine. I have just given two unique points, in the sense limited response is one unique point, and second unique point is that the response choices are provided to the respondent. So that way I have given an answer which is worth 2 marks. Okay, then let's come to the next question. I think we have about 4 questions more. Let's try to do them all in this video. Next section is coming from data analysis. So again, very easy to score. From the information provided by the questionnaire, the psychology teacher calculated measures of central tendency for her students' gym use. She calculated mean, mode, and median for this data. Measures of central tendency for gym use, that's number of hours per week. That's the title of the table. On the columns, we have the measure of central tendency and the score. And in the rows, we have mean, mode, and median. So we can just take a look at the figures. The information suggests a negative skew. Explain why. For positive, negative skew and normal distribution, I always suggest that you make a mental diagram. Becomes really easy for you to understand in your mind what is happening, and then to put it to words becomes easy. Of course, it isn't compulsory. It's just a strategy that prevents you from making error. Okay, firstly, what's a negative skew? Students confuse in that only. A negative skew is when there is high performance by most scorers. Whenever you have to identify a skew, you just have to see the direction of the tail. In this case, if this is the midline of the graph, the tail is towards the negative end. That's why it's called a negative skew. So first, be very clear in your mind what a negative skew is. Means make sure you understand the concept well. Now, whenever you have to justify, in your syllabus, the way of justifying is suggesting the positioning of the mean, median, mode, like how they are arranged in a way which is suggesting a negative Q. Median is always the peak point. So the highest point is where mode is always the peak point. So the highest point is where the mode is coming. In this case, value of mode is 6. So you can, like I said, visualize in your mind what I'm drawing over here. You don't need to draw it as such. So definitely the mode is going to come at the peak point at 6. Now, mean is going to be always towards the tail end. So in this case, 4.3 is going to be towards the left. And median is by virtue the middle value. So it's going to be in middle. So it is 5. So once you've visualized this mentally, now you can explain in words very easily. It's worth 3 marks. So if you just explain the positioning of each of the measures of central tendency, mean 1, median 2, mode 3, you can get your 3 marks. So I'll just show you one sample answer for this. As per the given table, the mean has the least value of all measures of central tendency 4.3, which is dragging it towards the negative tail end of the distribution. The mode has a higher value, 6, shifting it to the right of the mean. The median of 5 lies between these. This arrangement suggests a negative skew. So with the help of a diagram in my mind, I just outline what the distribution looks like I just visualize it, and then I just explain the distribution in words, making sure that I'm covering all the 3 measures, mean, median and mode. I don't miss out on any of them. So I get 1 mark for each, and that is how I get 3 marks. Okay, now continuing with this only, we have the next question 2.1. Explain what the sorry, this is a different question. Explain how psychology teacher could have ensured confidentiality in the follow-up study using the questionnaire. As we just read, in between they added something to the scenario, and they said now along with the interview she's going to be doing a questionnaire also. When I was discussing some points of the interview, I remember I mentioned how confidentiality, anonymity and all is more relevant to questionnaires. Now, here the key thing is not to confuse anonymity with confidentiality. You can give it as a suggestion, but always keep in mind that the two terms are different. When we talk about anonymity, for all practical purposes, what we are saying is the respondent does not even need to write their name on the questionnaire. That's anonymity. Confidentiality is that they might have to reveal their name to the researchers, but then that identity will not be shared with other researchers and will not be published in the report of the study. So give whichever suggestion you want from these. You can give anonymity also, it's within the larger purview of confidentiality. But explain it in the correct way. If you say that the researchers will know the name because they are there on the question and then they won't publish it in the report, that's not anonymity, that's confidentiality. Now again, you need to contextualize the answer because here they have mentioned psychology teacher. So they're asking you with reference to the scenario. It's for 3 marks. It's a how question, something like what we wrote about random sampling. The only difference is in this case it's AO2, it's not AO1. So think of it as 3 steps you need to give to outline the procedure of confidentiality because it's a how question. You're not to give a merit or demerit of maintaining confidentiality, and give the step like in order, step 1, step 2, step 3. Really increases the clarity of your answer and helps you gain 3 marks. So what we can write is the teacher could have maintained anonymity by informing participants that they need not disclose their names on the questionnaire. Okay, just a minute, I just like to see exactly what they had told us for the questionnaire. She's going to have a follow-up questionnaire with open and closed questions. Okay. So she can tell them that they need not disclose their names on the questionnaire. She could ensure that if she has a list of their names, registered in the study, She keeps the list password protected so that no other researcher or assistant can access it. She should also not disclose these names in the report of her study. As in the context, sometimes they do not give us enough wording that we can include in the answer. Like they're just telling us she'll do a questionnaire, open and closed questions. They haven't really given any more details. They've literally given it in one line. So in that case, there is nothing that we can write about when it comes to like trying to make it very specific to the study. So whatever best we can write, we have given that. I've given anonymity, but that will earn only 1 mark, and after all the answer is for 3 marks. So then I also need to talk about, okay, on the questionnaire specifically who's answering, that person's name is not there. But otherwise the teacher could be having a record of who are the participants who are included in the study. Like somewhere they must have consented on the consent form, some register must be there where their names are there. So then how she can protect confidentiality of that also I have outlined in a step-by-step manner. Starting from, like when I think of it, I always visualize, okay, at the beginning they're coming to write the answer. At that time, what could be done? Anonymity. After that, what can be done is the name which she has, now she need to, when it comes to data analysis phase, she'll need to refer to the names while talking about consent and all. So that time she should make sure no one else can access. Okay, then what she'll do, she'll be publishing the report of the study. That time what she can do, make sure not to write their names on the reports. So that way I just have to keep on thinking in my mind systematically, then I'll be able to put it down in that way also. Another question they've asked now related to this one. Apart from confidentiality, identify one ethical issue and briefly explain why the psychology teacher should have addressed this issue. This is like, you know how this is, you see, there are two questions in one. First is identify another ethical issue. Means they just want you to name one more issue. I would suggest you give a very brief definition also, though it's not compulsory. So take it as EO1 is 1 mark because it's identify. And in general, they want you to identify. So just naming or giving, like I said, a one phrase like description can be worth 1 mark. EO2, why the teacher should have addressed this issue is worth 2 marks. So bringing out somewhere in her study where that ethical concern is becoming relevant, that will be 1 mark, like just saying why it's important to a study. And second, why it's important to address, like in the sense, if she would have addressed, what would be the benefit of that? That will be a 3rd mark. So it's a very simple structure. Let's begin with AO1. Before I begin with AO1 and just name any issue for the heck of it, whatever is coming in my mind, I know I have to relate it to the scenario. So let me think about, okay, gym attendance, academic performance. What can be important? From all the ethics which I have learned, which one is most relevant here? So here, when it comes to this type of study, we know sensitivity is very important. So confidentiality we've already seen. Another ethical guideline very closely related to sensitivity is right to withdraw, and another one is informed consent. As such, in the process of the study, there is nothing that is causing harm to participants. So protection from harm I wouldn't take. It's not an intrusive study. So that wouldn't have relevance. So if I say just name protection from harm, I will not be able to connect it to the study. So it's not advisable to take that. So I would take something that is, I can connect. So informed consent, right to withdraw is there. Again, if I take something like deception, it's unlikely deception will be used because they haven't really mentioned. We can suggest it, but they haven't told us that deception will be done. So then that is not relevant. Like we can't assume that it is being done. But what is being done is they are being asked about their attendance and examination performance. So that is concretely what is happening. So we can give something relevant to that. Before I write the answer, since I've touched upon this, I just want to explain. Many students have a habit of assuming things, hypothetically imagine, oh, it will be done this way. Like, of course, the teacher will deceive them So because I assume that she will deceive them, let me take it up. Do not assume things which are not given in the scenario. They want you to write an answer relevant to the scenario, not relevant to your assumptions. Okay, so first I would explain to you about informed consent, because I'm not going to write that one. I'm going to write right to withdraw. If you had to write about informed consent, first you could name it. To give a brief description, you could just say it's about giving all relevant information, complete information to participants before the study can be conducted and taking their written agreement for the study. Why it is relevant over here? Because the topic is sensitive. Not all students will want to discuss about their gym attendance or their A levels exam performance. Many students like to keep such matters private. So at the beginning only, if they are told that this is what the study is about, they can think about whether they would like to participate or not, whether they are interested in disclosing this type of information in a study taking place on the topic. So that way you could explain informed consent. I will write and show you how to explain right to withdraw. So one other ethical issue is right to withdraw. Which allows participants to quit a study at any point in time. Now I need to say why it is important in this study. This study asks participants about personal matters such as gym attendance, and exam performance, though they may agree to it initially. When asked specific questions, they might not want to answer those, or they might not be comfortable answering those. Out of embarrassment or finding them intrusive. So they must have an opportunity to leave. So here the point which I'm putting across is that people can initially give consent to participate. They know what the topic is, so they've agreed. But once they hear the questions, they don't know what the exact questions at the time of consent. Once they hear the questions, they might decide this is not something they want to talk about, or this is becoming too personal, and that's why they do not want to continue. So definitely right to withdraw allows them to leave at any such stage which they have become uncomfortable with the study. So 1 mark just for identifying that right to withdraw. Second mark about why it is important to this study, because the nature of the study is such. Of course, it is important in every study, but particularly in this study because the topic is quite personal in nature. And third, just giving one example of why they might want to leave. There can be other reasons they might suddenly become disinterested. Even that reason is sufficient, but most probably because of this, because some questions become uncomfortable or intrusive in their opinion. So just giving an example showing that we're exactly thinking about this situation, what possibilities are there. So that is it for this paper. That's the end of the section C. If you have any comments about what you'd like me to cover further, you can leave them again in the comments box below. Any feedback, suggestions on the video, you can leave on the comments below. If you're looking for tuition for Oxford International or UK AQA Psychology, I have experience in teaching both. I'm currently teaching students from both curriculum. So I'm leaving my personal contact number and email ID in the description box and pinned comment below. You can contact me there. I make lots of videos on AQA psychology and they are relevant to both specifications, UK and international. Why I keep emphasizing this is because you shouldn't assume that just because on some video I have taken and moved from an international point of view or UK point of view that it's not useful to you. You can go through all the videos that I have made on AQA in my channel. All of them are relevant to you no matter which curriculum you belong to. Okay, so that is it for this video, and I will try to come up soon with another video which will most probably be a continuation of the topic which I'm already addressing, that is social influence or approaches. So something to continue with those. Okay, so thank you for watching this video till I see you next time. Bye bye.